Come with Channel 1 Yuma Productions while Union Pacific celebrates 150 years of service to our country.
150 years ago, Union Pacific was created by an act of Congress and signed into being by Abraham Lincoln. Thus began an epic endeavor to bring the far corners of this country closer, connecting not just points on a map, but people on a mission. Tie by tie, Union Pacific took form over vast plains, barren deserts, and soaring mountains. The vision of a transcontinental railroad became reality. Achieved with skill, courage, and commitment. Through generations of railroaders, these traits prevail.
Here's a special report in Yuma, Arizona.
Here in Arizona, Union Pacific has about 1,200 miles of track. Nationwide, we have about 32,000 miles of track. In Arizona, we have about 1,200 employees. And here in the Yuma area, we have about 40 trains a day that travel through the community.
Today, we're going to talk about an auto train, which will be coming through in a little while, that you're going to ride on. It's going to be about 80 cars long, about 7,500 feet, and it'll go down the tracks at about 70 miles an hour when it can. This train, when it's moving at full speed, will take approximately about 5 to 6 hours to get from Yuma to Tucson if everything goes good.
On a day-to-day basis, what we do out here is rapid responding. If a locomotive breaks down, a train breaks down, in the middle of nowhere, we get a phone call and then we respond. We go out there, we safely repair the train and try to get it moving in a timely manner.
During my inspections, I can either use a walking inspection or use my company vehicle. I can set the truck on the track and drive, traversing the track while doing an inspection. Right now I'm sitting, all the pressure is around the tires of the truck, but in order to lift it up, now I'm setting up on the high rail wheels. While inspecting the track, I'm looking for safety-specific defects, track defects, which could result in a derailment.
You know, they won't put you in a situation where you're going to get hurt or hurt others. And that's what I really like, because they allow you to, stop the line or say something and you're not going to be reprimanded for it. Even if it may cost them some money or something like that, the railroad don't care. They don't want to see people get hurt.
Yuma is a crew change point, so it's very important for our employees to see when the train that they're going to be operating is going to arrive. What this shows is the Union Pacific system. We have these lines which represent the track itself. You see a lot of colorful dots, and those are our signal systems. As you can imagine, red means stop, green means go. And sporadically through this display, we have where the actual trains are at. So an employee would know the train name and number that they're supposed to be on and take a look at this display and see where it's at. Right now, we're in Yuma, Arizona, and here in this display, we're right here.
A long time ago, trains used to have a caboose, which would carry a conductor and rear brakeman on board. And new technology come along, which allowed that conductor to move up to the head end and be with the locomotive engineer on the head end. That device is called a flashing rear end device, or a FRED. It's a telemetry, it's a radio between the rear of the train and the head of the train that allows the engineer to place the train in emergency, and it can also tell him his brake pipe pressure on the rear. It was one of those technology improvements that come along to make trains safer and also make them longer.
Behind me, you have an example of a new technology in the railroad. The wooden rail ties are soon going to be a thing of the past. Now what we have are concrete ties that we are using. They're much more environmentally friendly, and they also last a lot longer, saving the company money.
In the past 16 years, there's been two big technological changes that have affected me as a locomotive engineer. One of them was distributive power, placing the locomotives in the middle and on the rear of the train by remote control. The other one has been we call it an energy management system. One of the systems that we're working on is called Trip Optimizer, and it is basically a cruise control for the trains. It allows the engineer to place the train into cruise control mode and let a computer monitor the train and run it as it goes up and down the tracks. It doesn't mean that the crew is not there on the locomotive, they're not watching, they're monitoring the system, but it's just to help save fuel and get more product over the road, and allows the computer to run the train down the track more efficiently. We're getting more miles per gallon out of our fuels. 1 ton of freight, 490 miles per gallon. So this is going to save us a lot of money down the road. And we actually track and see how much fuel they save month by month. And they do get a financial reward based on the amount of fuel that they've saved during that month. We also have new technology called distributive power, which allows us to place remote control locomotives in the middle and on the rear of our trains. Make our trains safer, we can make them longer, handle better, get them over the road better for the public.
Over a century ago, 2 railroads broke ground in different parts of the American frontier. They had a common goal: to open vast areas of the West to settlement. It was the mid-19th century. Thousands of European immigrants joined American pioneers in pushing the frontier westward. Yes, America was on the move west. But how to get there? Between the Mississippi and Pacific Ocean stretched 1,800 miles of rugged, unsettled terrain. The settlers had no easy route to California. They faced either an arduous trip by covered wagon across the uncharted plains and mountains, or a perilous sea journey around South America.
This is the narrows of the mighty Colorado River. What it shows you is the Colorado River and the Gila River before any dams were put in. When this floodwater would recede, and this is what makes Yuma so important, this was the safest place to cross. And what we did here in about 1849 is that we have a rope ferry right here at the Narrows.
Meanwhile, a transportation revolution was sweeping America. The steam locomotive, invented in England in the 1820s, triggered railroad fever in this country. That's what America needed, a transcontinental railroad. But building one would be an awesome task.
Mr. President! Mr. President!
Arguments over the route and financing were heard at the highest levels of government. Meanwhile, out in Missouri, the state's General Assembly chartered the Pacific Railroad. On July 4th, 1851, groundbreaking ceremonies for the first railroad west of the Mississippi were held at St. Louis. But its progress across Missouri was slow. 1861. The Civil War ended the arguments over northern versus southern routes. To counter a Confederate threat to California, the Union needed a link to the Pacific. In 1862, President Lincoln signed the Pacific Railroad Act, which created the Union Pacific Railroad.
The line of said railroad shall commence in the territory of Nebraska, thence running westerly upon the most direct route to meet and connect with the Central Pacific Railroad Company of California. And the Central Pacific Railroad is authorized to construct a railroad from the Pacific coast to form a continuous line of railroad from the Missouri River to California.
Jumping off point for the venture was Omaha, Nebraska, a raw frontier village on the Missouri River. But the groundbreaking ceremony on December 2nd, 1863, was all that happened. The war consumed the manpower and money needed for serious construction.
There are no investors. Congress must act again. The land grant is doubled.
As the Civil War raged, the North managed to keep Missouri on its side. But that didn't stop Confederate guerrillas from disrupting construction and service on the Pacific Railroad. By the war's end in 1865, the Pacific Railroad had struggled across Missouri to Kansas City. But failing finances kept it from going any further. Construction of the Union Pacific started again, but progressed slowly. By the spring of 1866, Union Pacific's rail line stretched from Omaha to Fremont, Nebraska, only 40 miles away. But that summer, former Union General Grenville Dodge became Union Pacific's new chief engineer, and the urgent push west began. Dodge's new army was an assortment of Irish immigrants, Mexicans, Civil War veterans, and even convicts from eastern jails. But they worked.
From Omaha we started, barely 1,000 men strong. By the time we were done, we were 10,000 strung out for a good 200 miles across Indian territory. The tie gangs went ahead putting down the ties, and we came behind laying down the rails, pushing the end of the track ahead of us. It was a real international enterprise. The rails come from Pittsburgh, the ties from Wisconsin, and the sweat from Ireland. The graders went on ahead preparing the way, stringing up the bridges and cutting down the hills. Those fine boys did it the hard way, with a pick and mule cart and a good Ames shovel. Oliver Ames was president of the railroad, you know. And we come behind, swarming across the plains, laying the iron in place. We made good time. Some days we laid 3 miles a track, some days more.
In November of 1867, they reached Cheyenne, Wyoming. The next spring, they pushed further west, on the way to link up with the Central Pacific Railroad, building east from Sacramento, California.
Christmas 1867, we spent in Cheyenne, freezing half to death. But there were good times too. The photographers came and took our picture. And we'd shine up the engine and all look important. And on payday, well, that was a time to let go. Those canvas towns that followed us had plenty of ways to spend our money. Next year we didn't stop. That was 1868. We was in the mountains and it was tunnel and blast, pitch and chop, and the devil take the hindmost. In the spring of '69, then we were free and clear and racing toward the Central Pacific boys across the Utah Territory.
Finally, on May 10th, 1869, the nation realized its dream of a transcontinental railroad. Crews from both railroads met at Promontory, Utah. At 12:47 p.m., officials drove a golden spike.
Ladies and gentlemen, on the north side, Dr. Durant with the silver spike, and on the south side, Governor Stanford with the golden spike. At a given signal, you gentlemen are to drive your spikes. Ready? Swing!
Done, said the telegraph message to the world. A railroad linked the nation. The construction crews left in their wake tiny, struggling communities which could now take root. Union Pacific, which had been granted land to subsidize construction costs through this wilderness, began to sell the West to land-hungry people in Europe and the East. Railroads stimulated the growth of agriculture, aided the development of new industries, and helped uncover the riches of the West. Riches like coal. Discovered in Wyoming by Union Pacific construction crews, this vital resource provided a ready source of fuel for steam locomotives. And cattle. This industry grew in the West because of the railroads. thousands of cattle were driven north from Texas to Kansas and western Nebraska for shipment to packing houses in Omaha, Kansas City, and St. Joseph, Missouri. In the South and Southwest, railroads grew because of cattle. North-south rail connections started replacing cattle drive trails. The Iron Mountain Railroad from St. Louis to the Arkansas border. The Texas and Pacific Railroad from Marshall to El Paso. The International and Great Northern Railroad from Palestine to Longview. These were just a few of the new lines. But as fast as the lines appeared, they went broke because the cattle trains could not provide return traffic. Many of the bankrupt railroads merged into bigger roads. Even the Pacific Railroad went bust twice. Despite the bankruptcies, industry giants competed fiercely in building financial empires. They fought epic battles for control of railroads and built new lines to serve the expanding West. As the bewildering assortment of lines appeared on the map, they continued to change hands, change names, and eventually consolidate into larger entities. Some of these lines eventually became the Missouri Pacific Railroad. By 1880, Union Pacific added the Kansas Pacific and Denver Pacific to its system, gaining access to Kansas City and Denver. And in 1884, it completed the Oregon Short Line, which linked Omaha and Portland, Oregon, via Idaho. Then the expansion halted temporarily. In 1893, Europe and India stopped backing its currency with gold and silver, causing financial panic in America. Union Pacific went into receivership and was auctioned off at the Omaha Freight House in 1897. The buyer? Edward H. Harriman of New York, one of America's greatest railroaders. To this day, the railroad retains the strict maintenance standards which he established.
I've been a railroader all my life, and my father before me, but the first time I met that fella Harriman, I'll never forget. He wore little rimless glasses, and those eyes, they could look right through you. He was an Easterner, and he knew his business. And what he didn't know, he surely set out to learn. Do you know what he did? Right off, he has an observation car tied on a locomotive, and he has himself pulled, slowly, mind you, and only during the day, all the way from Omaha to the Pacific Ocean. And he asks questions. What weight are those rails? How much corn will those cars hold? He learned the railroad.
1898, and Harriman returns to New York. $25 million is the initial outlay to rebuild rusting tracks and replace aging equipment. New bridges, tunnels, fill in the valleys, level off the hilltops, replace the rail, the ties, the roadbed. And when it is done, Harriman has rebuilt the Union Pacific, rebuilt as he foresees for a vastly expanding West. And to quicken that expansion, Harriman goes to the farmer's aid. Men like Farmer Smith are hired to spread the gospel of better farming methods. Rolling colleges of agriculture whistle-stop to curious crowds from Bonner Springs, Kansas to Union Gap, Washington. The latest in farm equipment, how to grow better potatoes, wheat, sugar beets, and how to dress up your apples from tree to pie. Food, it's needed soon enough, and in enormous quantities. The war to make the world safe for democracy puts the test of fire to Harriman's rebuilt Union Pacific. Doughboys heading for over there, and the munitions to back them up. Soon the nation's rail system is clogged. Though Union Pacific's modernized operation is equal to the challenge, other roads bog down. In crisis, President Woodrow Wilson acts. December 26, 1917, Wilson takes control of the nation's railroads. Harriman has built well, and the government routes huge quantities of vital freight over his rails. And then it's over there, and Johnny does come marching home. The railroads are returned to their owners.
The Los Angeles Limited leaving on track 5.
The turn of the century saw America tinker with inventions that would eventually change her way of life forever. They would also change railroading, which was experiencing continued growth. New lines kept springing up. The Union Pacific opened a line from Salt Lake City to Los Angeles in 1905. In 1910, Western Pacific went into service between Salt Lake City and Oakland, California.
The first train was here in Yuma in 1877. It really did change life on the river. This bridge is called the Swing Span Pivot Bridge, and today the only remnant left is this great big column. The top of it says 1875. There is a straight-on look at that Swing Span Pivot Bridge, and you can see this amazing superstructure. It was a feat of engineering excellence to be able to build something like this out of wood that would support a great big heavy steam engine and a train. The first railroad came in 1877. It was a political shenanigan, and that was that the federal government never gave the people of Yuma permission to cross the river. And they waited and waited. They had the bridge, but they did not have tracks laid. So some of the local men laid the tracks and drove the engine across in the middle of the night, tooting the horn. And by the way, that would have been the alignment that we don't have this today, but this was down Madison Avenue. And in the background, you can see Fort Yuma. If you are, a guest at the Hilton Garden Inn, this is the site where you're staying. There's that railroad bridge, there's the pivot. The hotel would be located right here. The first hotel on this site, today the Hilton Garden Inn would be right here, and the parking lot it would be over here, but this is called the Southern Pacific Hotel. It had 33 rooms upstairs. It had fine dining downstairs. The train that we have moved to the site, we have the Baldwin locomotive seated here. We do have track laid in the exact location that the train entered into Yuma. Everything that you had goods from the outside came through San Francisco. We were the first stop on the riverboat, and we were also the first stop on the train. So people in Yuma, believe it or not, were drinking French wine and wearing French fashions. This is the last and final bridge. This is the pivot again that you can actually go out and still see. In 1924, the train actually was moved to higher ground up near the territorial prison because the bridges that were right on the river, there were 3 different iterations of this bridge, and actually all 3 of them were washed away by the floods of either the Gila or the Colorado.
As America roared into the 20s, passenger traffic reached all-time highs and industries boomed. It couldn't have happened without the railroads.
6 million Americans ride Union Pacific passenger trains in 1922. Flappers walk down the aisles, take the grand tour of the American West. A little soot from the coal burner up front. Enjoy the luxury of a hot shower at 60 miles per hour across the Wyoming plains. Hairdos, the latest fashion. Jazz time, the cat's pajamas, America revels. Industry grows. The automobile is in its infancy. so are the roads. And railroads reach their peak as the great carriers of people on the move. A nation enjoying the fruits of its industry. And in the men's clubroom car, by special wire, the latest stock market reports. Stock market reports, 1929. And it all grinds to a halt. The Great Depression. Unemployed thousands are put to work paving a network of roads for a nation that is fast taking to the rubber tire and giving up the steel wheel.
Railroads suffered during the Great Depression of the 1930s. In 1933, Missouri Pacific went into trusteeship under federal bankruptcy court. In 1935, the Western Pacific went into receivership. Union Pacific managed to remain solvent, but fought hard for business. To stimulate passenger travel, UP tested innovations such as the nation's first streamliner, the City of Salina. It created the Sun Valley Ski Resort, the first in the West, and solved the problem of getting people up the mountains by inventing the ski lift at its Omaha shops.
Slowly, the Depression years pass to be replaced by a new and greater threat to the nation's security. On December 7th, 1941, along with the rest of the nation, the railroad goes to war again. Through the blowing wheat fields of Nebraska, the pace quickens. 25 new, massive, big boy steam locomotives, largest in the world, to move Sherman tanks and blockbusters, Norden bomb sights and K-rations, twice the tonnage of the First World War, troop trains, an endless stream. And then it's over. Today, the Golden Spike rests in a safe in the Stanford Museum at Palo Alto, California. The place of its driving is a National Historic Monument.
Today and tomorrow, our efforts are no less ambitious. Serving our customers, moving the nation's goods, supporting thousands of communities, keeping the country strong, building America.